Before we dive into today's Tanya, I want to clarify an idea that we've been discussing. So we've been talking a lot about different energies. The energy of Kedusha, of holiness. The energy of Klipas Noga, the bright Klipa. The energy of the three impure Klipas, the Shosh Klipas Tameas, which are tied up in negativity. So really what we're talking about here is energy. We're talking about, when we're talking about Klipas Noga, really it's about the observer's effect. So scientifically, there's these really cool studies that are based on the observer's effect, which is that when matter is studied, if it is observed as a particle, it acts as a particle. If it is observed as a wave, it acts as a wave. So science is basically called that matter is a wavicle. Okay, it's both. It really depends on how it is observed. The second something's observed, it really collapses into the reality by which it's being observed. And so the idea of Klipas Noga, the bright Klipa, is that anything in this world that isn't inherently godliness or isn't inherently tied up in the klipas, three impure klipas, it really does depend on the observer's effect. Meaning, as soon as I come into it, it is no longer just neutral. Either I'm taking that energy and I'm elevating it, or I'm taking that energy and I'm downgrading it into the three impure klipas. Like we mentioned, is that downward escalator. It's never just staying in that neutral place. It's either going up or going down. And so the second something comes into my space, there's no such thing as it just is. The way I'm observing it as a vehicle for godliness or as a vehicle for just my own self-indulgence is going to shift that energy. Okay, and going into today's Tanya. Now the Alter Rebbe will go into depth on how tshuva, the process of returning to God, can rectify a specific sin. So the specific sin that we're zeroing in on here is the wasteful emission of seed. So what's the way to do tshuva? Quote from today's Tanya. The vitality in the drops of semen that one issued wastefully, even though it is being degraded and incorporated in the three unclean klipot, can nevertheless ascend from there by means of true repentance, right? True returning to God. And intense concentration and devotion during the, drumroll please, here's our big answer, recital of the Shema at that time. As known from the teachings of our master, Rabbi Yitzhak Gloria of blessed memory. So I am getting to share this Tanya with you, literally a 10-minute walk from the resting place of the holy Ari HaKadosh, who gave us this spiritual healing. He says the way to do tshuva for the sin of wasteful emission of seed is through intense devotion and concentration at the time of saying the bedtime Shema. So the Alter Rebbe is going to teach us the deeper meaning behind the Talmudic saying, he recites the Shema at bedtime is as if he held a double-edged sword. And actually part of there's after the Shema in the Tehilas Hashem, here I got it right here. We got some props, okay? In the Tehilas Hashem Chabad Siddur, there's after the Shema, there's also other beautiful verses that we say. And one of them is actually talking about holding a double-edged sword. So what does it mean a double-edged sword? One edge with where to slay the bodies of the extraneous forces, the klipa that have become the garments of vitality in the drops of semen, right? So one to slay the aspect that is keeping this energy tied up into negativity, and another edge by which the vitality ascends from the klipot as is known to the students of Kabbalah. Classic Alter Rebbe, those who know Kabbalah, there you go, okay? So really, one is to slay, to break off the part that is keeping this energy tied, and the other part is to actually help the energy ascend to its true place. The Alter Rebbe now contrasts this sin to the sin of illicit relations. The sin of wasting seed is not mentioned explicitly as a prohibition, meaning we don't have a clear line in Torah where it says, if you do this, the consequences are ABC, okay, which is a classic thing for a prohibition of the Torah. So we're going to look at this quote from the practical Tanya and understand the background of how we do learn about the sin of the Torah. Torah states that Aaron and Onan, who purposely wasted their seed, were evil in the eyes of God. So if you remember the story of Yehuda and Tamar, if you want to go take a look at it, Tamar's two husbands, Aaron and Onan, who were Yehuda's sons, they both died. And the reason being is that they didn't want to impregnate Tamar because they didn't, the first son didn't want that her figure would be ruined through her carrying a child, and therefore he wasted his seed. And the second son didn't want to do the mitzvah of Yibum, which is that really he understood that spiritually speaking, the child that he was going to conceive with his past his deceased brother's wife was going to spiritually carry on the lineage of his brother, and he didn't want to do that. So therefore, he also wasted his seed when having relations with Tamar. Okay, so this was evil in the eyes of God, from which the Talmud concludes that the act is prohibited biblically, right? So that is the biblical source, according to Gemara Nida. The Torah also prohibits the indirect waste of seed as a result of lewd thoughts with the verse, guard yourself from every evil thing, Deuteronomy. from which the Talmud concludes, do not dwell in sexual thoughts during the day and come to impurity at night. Talmud Kasubos. However, in Leviticus chapters 18 and 20, where the Torah lists all the sexual sins, like, all right, guys, this is everything that you should not do, right? There's no mention of the wasting of semen. It's not mentioned with the other illicit relations. The Tanya suggests that the omission in Leviticus, the fact that it's not mentioned there, hints to the theme of our discussion, that the spiritual damage caused by wasting seed is different than the spiritual damage caused through other sexual sins, okay? So the fact that it's not mentioned with the other sexual sins shows us that there's a different spiritual reality happening in the wasting of seed, and therefore a different spiritual way to heal the issue. So even though wasting seed is considered a worse sin than the other sexual prohibitions. Okay? So we shouldn't think that just because it isn't mentioned with the other illicit relations in the Torah and Leviticus, that it is something that's considered lighter. On the contrary, the omission from Leviticus did not imply that wasting seed is less serious than other transgressions. In fact, the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, considers that that the wasting of seed is more serious than any of the prohibitions in the entire Torah. The Tanya now explains why, spiritually speaking, this is so, right? Why the person's sin is great. That's the quote from the sin of wasting seed. Like, what is the big spiritual issue that is caused through this? So, wasting emissions quantitatively creates more klipa. Okay, the individual sin is great with regard to the enormity, abundance, and the purity of the klipo he begets and multiplies them to an exceedingly great extent through wasteful emission of semen. So we say klipa, we're talking about, remember that orange peel, we're talking about peels, we're talking about concealment, we're talking about layers of negativity that adds to the world. So quantitatively, it actually adds more klipa in the world, even more so than forbidden relations. When measured by the quantity of the klipa that sin creates, the sin is graver than forbidden relations. Interesting. Okay, so now let's look at it qualitatively. In the case of forbidden relations, one contributes additional strength and vitality to a most unclean klipa, from where he is powerless to raise up the vitality by means of ordinary tshuva. The person must do tshuva with such great love that his willful wrongs are transformed into merits. So meaning, in terms of the actual quality, the strength, the energy that he's putting in to the layers of concealment of this world, they're much stronger when it comes to the act of illicit relationships, and much harder to actually return the energy. We're learning that relatively it's easy to return the energy of wasteful emission of seed through the bedtime Shema, versus it still has to be serious. It has to be with devotion and real heart and real love. But the tshuva that a person needs to do to redeem that energy through illicit relations is much more serious. Okay, so the amazing woman who does the graphics for these slides, I love that she's just like, let's put a kiwi here. I think that's fantastic. Like, what do we do for the image on this one? It's a kiwi. Love it. Okay, so our sages say, which is a fault that cannot be rectified? What's that? A person who has forbidden relations and causes an illegitimate child to be born. For in that case, even if the sinner undertakes a great repentance, he still cannot elevate the energy to holiness, since the energy has already come down to this world and is being dressed in a body of flesh and blood. So I really feel like this helps us understand for a second what we're talking about. We're talking about energy, meaning if the energy is still available, I can take that energy, I can elevate it to holiness. But if that energy is already manifested as a human body, I can't mess with that energy. So I just really feel like this helps, at least for me, to understand we're really shifting energy. I'm either bringing energy up or I'm bringing it down lower, and really understanding in a very physical sense that the energy is impacting the world. So the absence of a substantive spiritual container in the case of wasted seed explains why it's so easily reversible and at the same time so spiritually damaging, right? So basically, since the energy hasn't actually been absorbed, right? It's wasteful emission of seed. It's not an illicit relationship. And therefore, the nukva, the klipa, hasn't actually absorbed it, and therefore it doesn't have a container. So that shows why the energy, it hasn't been contained anywhere in the klipas, and therefore I can grab it and take the energy back through tshuva out of love, through saying the Shema with great devotion. But at the same time, it shows why it's very spiritually damaging until that tshuva takes place. Why? Because that energy that is being released into the world, and its influence can flow without inhibition and restraint, meaning it doesn't have the nukva, it doesn't have something to contain that negative energy. That negative energy is just kind of like running rampant. And so it shows why it's easy to do tshuva on, but the damage of the amount of klipa it's creating, how that klipa is not being contained, is extraordinarily spiritual damaging. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to learn today's Tanya together.